Okay, I want to make a start just because I'm sure that lots of you have very busy mornings today. But firstly, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to join us for the last in this series of workshops that Zen has hosted over the summer. It's been a really exciting time. We've explored areas such as autism and ADHD. Last time we focused on anxiety and trauma, which we're going to recover in parts of this presentation. And this one is a final workshop on the recovery curriculum. And it's really poignant at the moment as we're about to go back into the next academic year from next week, how we are going to design and deliver a curriculum that engages and inspires our pupils, but also gives children the space and the time to adjust, transitioning back to school after potentially being out of education for 6 months, and how we can ensure that we minimise any disadvantages or any gaps that children might be entering school in September, and still addressing those positive mental well-being aspects of the recovery curriculum. So most of you will have met me before, but I'm Olivia. In a former life before Zen Educate, I was a special needs TA and a special needs support worker for a children and young persons charity based in Birmingham. I mostly supported children and young people with autism and PMLD, profound multiple learning difficulties. But I also, towards the end of that career, went into supporting young adults with mental health difficulties and social emotional behavioural difficulties as well. I'm now an account manager at Zen Educate, meaning that I liaise with our head teachers, Senkos, and senior leadership team members at special schools, pupil referral units, and mainstream schools with a high level of SEN need. And I'm also the SEN lead at Zen, meaning that most of you have met me before in these training sessions. And they're designed to share knowledge, experience, and get people talking about what we can all learn from one another and how we can best support our pupils with additional needs in school, both in terms of academic progress, but also their independence, emotional and mental well-being. I'm very excited to be joined by Mr. Andrew Ross today as well. He is our guest speaker for this morning. He is a current lead teacher at acute adolescent mental health unit. And he's also a former deputy head teacher at a London secondary school. Andrew's got lots and lots of experience in providing expertise in academy transitions, behaviour and attendance, as well as safeguarding, and has now developed his career and his professional path to go into supporting adolescents who've been sectioned in a mental health unit and providing his expertise in that new setting, which he will go into much more detail on later on. So what we're going to focus on today, we're going to revisit some of the reasons as to why it's important we understand anxiety and trauma and what our pupils have been through during lockdown. We're going to cover some of the 5 losses and the 4 consequences that have been identified as having affected children and young people the most during COVID. And then Andrew's going to move on to his experiences and what teachers and SLT members can do to support a recovery-based curriculum in schools from September. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, we're definitely going to leave time at the end for a Q&A. So please put them in the chat box and address it to either all panelists or to everybody. And we'll make sure that we save some time at the end to go through as many questions as possible. But also my contact details will be at the end if you want to get in touch directly to discuss anything further. So firstly, we're going to revisit why we need to understand anxiety and trauma. So anxiety is absolutely a normal feeling. We all feel it at some point during our lives. It's designed for us to prepare our bodies and our brains for danger or unknown situations. And it activates our flight or fight response to danger and unknown situations. Around 1 in 6 to 1 in 8 children and young people will experience significant anxiety during their school careers. And this means that it's not just your normal anxiety, your day-to-day worries about events in your life. This is where it has an impact on their day-to-day functioning during their school careers. And it could be for a number of different reasons. It could be test anxiety or grade anxiety. It could be social phobia around how you're interacting with peers, or it could be worries about the future and career opportunities and future prospects that we see more in the young people that Andrew might work with. Children on the autism spectrum and children with attachment needs will certainly be more prone to experiencing this anxiety. And I'm sure that some of you will be thinking about some of your pupils who have additional needs and how their routine and structure has changed over lockdown. And what does that mean in terms of their anxiety levels coming back into school in September? When we feel anxiety and when we feel stress, the stress hormone cortisol levels rise within our bodies and within our brains. And when this cortisol level rises too much, it actually blocks imprinting on the brain. So you may have a child who's feeling incredibly anxious in class, but isn't displaying any physical symptomology. They're not fidgeting, or they're not sweating, they're not pacing, but actually they are simply trying to hold themselves together. And if you ask that child, what did I teach you yesterday? They wouldn't necessarily be able to recall that, because their brain had blocked that imprinting of your lesson onto their brain, as they were simply trying to hold themselves together with that anxiety feeling. So the anxious child is not a learning child. And as I'm sure we're all aware, the children coming back into school in September will be feeling some sort of anxiety. Everything's changed for them over the last 6 months, and we'll go into just how that's affected them a little bit later on. So the impact of anxiety and trauma on education, and actually the whole lifetime of a child, is really far-reaching. Anxiety disorders and trauma and other mental health conditions such as depression will have an impact on physical health, self-esteem, academic performance, diet, sleep, everything. And so as educators, it's really important for us to understand that students who experience trauma and anxiety are less likely to leave school with good grades. They're less likely to go on to further study, and they're less likely to go on to find and keep a stable job. But also beyond that, it's harder for them to have a supportive network of peers, to engage in safe and intimate caring relationships, and then eventually to go on to parent in an adaptive manner. So what we do for our pupils over the next couple of months to help them address this anxiety and address the trauma that they may have gone through won't only just affect their school life, it will also affect their adult life and how they go on to parent their children in the future. So the impact of COVID-19 has been far-reaching for all of us. We've all experienced some level of anxiety and uncertainty, and there's been a lot of research conducted into the 5 losses, the 5 overarching losses that have become evident through the research and through the news reports and through the statistics that have been released through COVID. And it's these 5 losses that have become the catalyst for the need for a recovery curriculum. And we're going to explore each one in depth, but as I go through them, I want you to think about your pupils in your classroom, or the pupils that might be in your new school if you're starting a new job, and how these losses may have affected each and every one of them. So there's been the loss of routine, there's been the loss of structure, a loss of friendship, a loss of opportunity, and a loss of freedom. And these 5 losses will have triggered anxiety, trauma, and bereavement responses in some of our pupils. For some of them, it may have been all 3, and they are very powerful forces. And for all of them to hit a young person or a child at once is simply unheard of, and is never a planned thing to happen. And this is incredibly significant for a developing child who's still going through the major milestones in their development. The children will be vulnerable when they come back to school, and they will need us to address that they have lost a significant amount in their normal day-to-day lives that we need to make sure that we are conscious of and appreciative of as well. So routine, we all know that routine is incredibly important for children. It gives them self-control, so they understand that you can't have everything you want all the time. You can't play all day. You can't watch TV all day. You need to be able to find that balance between enjoyable activities like playtime, but also the functional activities like homework or lessons. And so for having some children out of school for 6 months, they may have had not much of a routine at home, where they've been able to have more free reign over what they do. And so coming back into a structured environment might be quite anxiety inducing, but it also may really, really help them in terms of going back to their normality. It reduces their stress. A predictable daily routine allows children to realize and know that they're in a secure environment. They're not worrying about what if this happens, what if that happens, where do I go now, what's expected of me in this. They feel secure and they feel loved and they feel safe. Again, that might have gone for some children. And increased confidence. So knowing that they're in red class and that they do lots of different activities in red class, it will develop their confidence to be able to try new things in that environment because they feel safe, because they're around their peers, because they're around a teacher or a teaching assistant that makes them feel comfortable. And they know that if whatever they're trying for the first time doesn't necessarily go well, they've got people around them who will help them overcome that failure or that difficulty, and that they can rely on them to be able to achieve something new in their lives. But what was their new routine? The children who've been out of school since March may have had a completely different new routine at home, and one that hasn't given them the structure that they needed in order to learn effectively or develop effectively. Was online learning possible for all of our children? I'm sure some of you have had children who either share a laptop with other siblings or don't have internet access at home. How were they able to access learning whilst we were in lockdown? Disrupted sleep may have been a real big issue for some of our children, especially if they are from single parent households or have multiple siblings, where establishing a good sleep routine is quite difficult. And sleep for the developing child allows for brain growth and brain functionality to develop, and allow them to develop as they should do normally, and allow for those learning connections to be made. And we do have to think about the new routines that may have come into our children's lives. Our routines at home, or the children's routines at home, may have become one of abuse, or they may have become ones of self-harm. Some of our children will have internalized this trauma and internalized their anxiety and not know how to cope with that because they don't have that network of peers or teachers around them to talk to them, to listen to them. And this may have resulted in self-harm, either physically or digitally. Something that Professor Barry Carpenter, who is the founder of the recovery curriculum, noted was that this increased reliance on online learning and online platforms for access to schoolwork may have actually tempted some children to explore areas of the dark web or areas of the internet that isn't appropriate for anybody to view or for people of their age to view. And they may have seen things that are actually quite traumatizing because there was such a reliance on technology and digital learning. Very similarly, there's been a loss of structure. So children will have found it alarming that the infrastructure of their week has simply been abandoned. And no matter how logical the reasoning, this would have still been quite traumatic for our children. One day they were in school, the next they weren't. And it can be very deeply troubling for those children. Structure, as with routine, helps children know where they are, what's expected, what's coming next. So now we're doing PE in the sports hall. Next, we're going back to blue class for literacy. They know that in school, they have to follow certain rules and regulations. And then when they go home, they follow different rules and regulations there. Think about how important we place structure on the EYFS curriculum or for children with autism. Some children have their days broken down into minute-by-minute activities, and they would have had to change their whole routine to be from school learning to home learning. And for some children, that structure, that transition may have been incredibly difficult and really traumatic for them. Think about the children with attachment needs. So not all children have a secure attachment with their caregivers at home. Their attachment may actually be to a specific teacher or a teaching assistant that helps them in class. And one day that teacher and teacher assistant was there, the next they were suddenly not. And although we can explain it's because of the virus, it's because of your safety, for children, do they really comprehend what that means? When we say you've got a virus to a child, as in a normal flu-like virus, they get over that. They generally get better within 1 to 2 weeks. So how are they meant to comprehend that this virus is very different to a normal cold or flu? Home learning is not their normal. Some parents will have been able to give fully structured and fully routined lessons to their children at home with as much digital learning as possible, but it's still not their normal. And for some children, that can really make them feel quite alone. Which brings me on to the loss of friendship. And there has been a significant and immense loss of friendship. Whilst we can maintain communication and friendships via social media, via Facebook, via Instagram, WhatsApp, it's not the same for our children and young people. It's not the same as sitting on the same table as your best friend, sharing a joke, having a laugh, discussing work, playing in the playground. And certainly for those younger children in the EYFS and primary year groups, playing in the playground and running off that energy with your best friends can be a real stress relief. For some children, this will have actually triggered a bereavement response, as if they've lost their friendships entirely, and can be really, again, traumatic for those children. They will mourn and they will grieve the loss of this deeper connection with their peers. And how are we going to address that when they come back and we've still got things like social distancing and staggered playtimes in place for some schools? How are we going to ensure that they know that they've still got those friendships and those connections, but they can't necessarily go back to doing it the way that they did before COVID? The loss of opportunity has been quite a big news article in the last couple of weeks, as we've seen GCSE and A-level results released somewhat controversially. And in the news, this A-level student said, well, I was preparing to run a marathon, but now they tell me there was no race. For years, these students would have been learning that it's almost a rite of passage to take your GCSEs in year 11, to take your A-levels in year 13 and year 12, to go on to university or to go on to sixth form or to go on to college. And now that has just been abandoned. Will children see the significance in examinations again? Will they feel that the judgments and grades were placed on them were fair? And I'm sure we all saw the news articles where the A-level results were quite controversially lower than most students were expecting, and that's now being reevaluated. The GCSEs, on the other hand, were, I think it was 25 to 28% higher than average, and lots of students achieving the grade 8s and 9s or the A's and the A stars. Do those children actually feel they deserved those? Some students may feel that that the grades placed on them will now limit their future opportunities. So for those A-level students who had been applying to Russell Group unis with expectations of two A's and a B or all A's, may now have actually got 2 B's and a C or all B's. So how will this impact their financial stability and their career opportunities? How will this impact their ability to buy a flat or to buy a house with their other half, or to live on their own and pay rent effectively? All of these anxieties will be quite prevalent in our adolescent year groups, and they'll be worrying, well, how this is the rest of my life now that I've been preparing for this since year 9. How am I going to manage this now that it's been placed upon me? And an interesting point made about the loss of freedom was that we have to think about our young carers. Approximately 700,000 children and young people in the UK are young carers, whether that be to parental figures or to elderly family members who have either mental health or physical conditions. Or for younger siblings, if their parents need to go out and work longer hours, those older children were expected to look after the younger ones. School was their opportunity to be a child again, to play with their friends, to learn, to explore the world, and to explore all the aspects of learning and play that you can experience in school. And during lockdown, because of social distancing, any extra help they may have had around the home from carers from the NHS may have been stopped. And therefore, they may have been the sole carer for this family member or for siblings. And moving on from this, the online learning that they may have found the time to do potentially may have actually felt inconsequential to their care responsibilities. Not that they begrudge them in any way. Obviously, they love their family deeply and want to provide the best care possible. But that freedom of being a child, of being a young person and exploring what life they can lead in the future may have been taken away from them periodically. So some questions to think about, to take away, to think about particular children in your class, or maybe you can apply all of these questions to your pupils. Thinking about at school, what's that child's morning routine like? How is their independence level? Does that child experience difficulty in relating to staff now? Has something happened at home, or does that child spend a lot of time alone now, whereas they used to be quite interactive with other children? And at home, have there been any significant events in the family? Have any parents gone through divorce, or has there been a bereavement in the family? Has there been any history of trauma? Is that child a young carer? There's a whole holistic view that we now need to get of that child's experience over the last 6 months to understand how they're going to transition back to school and how we can help them individually and as a class get back into the routine of education while still addressing the mental well-being aspect of lockdown for them. So the 5 losses have triggered 4 main consequences. And that's one of bereavement. As I've said already, it might have triggered a grief response, a bereavement response at the sudden and actually indefinite. When we first went into lockdown, we didn't know how long this would be for. It could be for a couple of weeks, it could be months, and who knows how long this is going to go on for. So the indefinite loss of education, the indefinite loss of freedom, and the indefinite loss of routine and structure. Attachment, as we've gone through, children already have attachment needs, but the sudden loss of schools closing and the loss of friendship or seeing key workers or teachers every day may have triggered an attachment response in some children. And if attachment is not dealt with effectively, as we'll come on to in just a second, the overall academic performance of that child and the mental, emotional well-being of that child can be impacted significantly. The anxiety, who would have thought that schools would be ever closed in the ways that they have been? Most schools tried to stay open for those children who have key workers or with the HCP plans, but we never thought that all schools across the world would be closed because of a virus. And whilst children are used to school holidays happening for 2 to 6 to 8 weeks, they're given notice of that. That is their structure, that is their routine. They know that's going to happen. This happened overnight and there was no warning, or there was very little warning. Can children have the confidence that this isn't going to happen again? And we can't give them that confidence. We don't know what's going to happen, but that might be an ongoing question that children have for you. And how are you going to address that question if they ask? And finally, a trauma response. This is a traumatic event for us all. Children, young people, adults, the elderly. We've all been through something that was unprecedented, unexpected, and something that we've not dealt with in our lifetimes before. It's traumatic insofar as it's shaken us, it's shaken our own routines. We've all had to adapt to different ways of learning, to working from home, to communicating, and Andrew's going to come on to some ways in which you can take those learnings and re-implement them in school. And any curriculum that is going to take place from September needs to address those 5 losses and these consequences. And if not, then the performance, not only the academic performance, but the emotional and mental well-being of our children could be impacted for generations. And I talked a lot about attachment there, and it's important to understand why attachment matters so much. 50% of lifetime mental illness or mental disorders start before the age of 15. So if a person goes on to develop depression in their adult life, there's often a root in their earlier years. 10% of our children and young people will experience a diagnosable mental health condition at some point during their lives. And many of these, as again, are rooted in unaddressed attachment needs or early trauma in their younger years. 40% of children can have an insecure attachment with at least one caregiver. And as many as 80% of children with ADHD have insecure attachments with their main caregivers at home. And to demonstrate why insecure attachment can be so detrimental, those with secure attachments, so loving and caring and safe attachments with their caregivers, are better problem solvers. They're more curious about learning. They'll be asking questions, making connections between lessons a lot easier. They're cooperative and self-regulative, so can collaborate well with peers, but also understand their own emotions and regulate their behavior based on those emotions. And they're more self-aware and empathetic with others. So again, can socially interact on a much better scale than those who have insecure attachments. And so understanding this, again, is a catalyst for why we need to address those issues that have been raised during lockdown and the traumas that our children have gone through since schools closed back in March. So I'm going to hand over to Andrew now, who's going to talk a little bit about his experiences as a teacher in a mental health unit, and also a bit about his background and some of the tips that he's got for teachers and for SLT members as to how you can address these difficulties that children have experienced in the curriculum that you implement from September. So over to you, Andrew.
Thank you, Olivia, and good morning, everybody. Just to give a little bit more about my background, I'm certainly not an expert on this particular subject. Up until June of this year, I was involved in mainstream education as a leader, of which Olivia's explained. I then got the opportunity through Zen Education to have a contract here in a adolescent mental health unit. And as Olivia said, the majority of young people who arrive here have been sectioned under the Mental Health Act, or their parents have got to a point that they do want their young sons and daughters to be treated. Therefore, what the experiences that I've got, and I'd just like to give some examples, come from working in the NHS. This is part of the NHS, but also looking at the recovery of young people who have arrived at possibly the lowest point in their life. I hope that the examples I give will either prompt you to evaluate them for your own setting. They may prompt you for a different idea, but these are some of the experiences that when Olivia approached me and we began to discuss this, that I think was related to the recovery curriculum. And the first place I want to start really is with staffing. And oddly, I've had many a discussion of who's the most important part of a school. Is it the children, is it the staff, or is it both? And I tend towards both. And what I found in the NHS, which in a way is different to what I both experienced in mainstream education, but probably also as a leader put through, is people ask me how I'm feeling. And they have what's called a safety huddle. And each morning people gather together in small groups and they rate how they're feeling. And it's a really interesting model, because what you are able then to do is you understand how your colleagues are. Sometimes the colleagues will give details about their situation. And it just means that through the day, it's not an excuse for how they will work. But it's really a good example of people are just aware of how other people are feeling. And sometimes there can be solutions and sometimes they cannot, but it's just in how you approach that person during the day. And certainly I remember times in mainstream education where I possibly said something to somebody and then found out later what they were going through and thought, if I'd have known, I probably wouldn't have phrased it like that. And certainly that safety huddle is something really, really interesting that certainly I think mainstream education really can learn from. The next part of NHS is the focus groups, and it's really here at the establishment I'm working at, the opinions of everybody within the organisation is really valued, and it's something that's planned for. And I think during COVID, just as the safety huddle idea, the opportunity to hear from absolutely everybody in the staffing formally, so a consultant here will listen to what one of the nursing staff is saying and may take that suggestion on, is that those focus groups on a regular basis, both meeting and through technology now, through Zoom meetings, and even just through email communication, those focus groups of a range of staff just giving feedback on what is happening. Certainly in my experience since June, working during COVID here, has really, really evolved the way that the practice has developed in these uncertain times. And it's, again, I think something that really would benefit mainstream and any schooling, and it's another idea that I think the NHS has a real positive and can give a positive impact on schooling as well. The next point is part of my role here is to organise a team. We assist clinicians with the formulation of their diagnosis by finding out the history of a young person's education. And we also teach those people. We teach those pupils. And one point I really want to, I think, reassure all practitioners is what I found working during COVID is that the power of a normal lesson is just quite incredible. We had an inpatient here, a young man who, one of the reasons why he attempted suicide is because the online learning had just got so much for him, and all the online learning coming to him and he wasn't able to do it, just spiraled into real depression that led to that attempt. And it's interesting that when the colleagues of mine began to teach him here, that when he came back into a lesson, initially, the instruction was, oh, continue with your online learning, of which some pupils were really happy. The anxiety on his face was incredible. And when my colleague said, well, shall we just do some work together? I'll set you some like a normal class. You could physically see just that anxiety begin to lower. And I just want to just really say that I think as schools change, and here in the hospital, changes of systems of wearing masks, of PPE, the one thing that I think young people have found really valuable and certainly has aided their recovery is a teacher doing their normal structure and their normal routine. Clearly, young people will ask many questions, and leaders of schools and institutions may wish to think how that they plan that, of whether they say quite openly to young people, when you're in class, we are simply going to get back to normal and we're going to do what we do best, and therefore assist the teachers in that. Or if that's not the case in the school, the individual teacher says, there will be a time to discuss, but now let's just get on with just that sense of normality. Certainly within the recovery process that we've seen with young people here, and their rehabilitation and their reintegration back into society and mainstream education, it's certainly the feedback I've got, that the students enjoyed just the normality. And it's interesting that teachers here and it's very much an NHS idea, is that you have your individual role. You don't necessarily cross over as much as possibly sometimes do in education. And I think certainly my experience would have been that, oh, we need to do quite everything. Maybe that's not the case. Say to your teachers, as I said to my teachers, just give that sense of normality. The effects have been, have been quite dramatic in what we've seen here, certainly over the past 3 months. The next point is that journey of education and combating exam stress. And I think there's a real message. Again, what we've seen here is that young people here at times have their education on pause. And again, just the opportunity to speak to those young people and that message that education is a journey. It doesn't stop at 16, it doesn't stop at 18. And we do have young people who replan, and the effect is that somebody has said to them that that is okay, that they can have a different plan to how they approach their education. If they miss a year, if they start on a level 1 course and then develop into a level 2. And that's also very important, the conversations I've had with parents as well, that has been so much reassurance. And I think it's interesting, it's something that we can consider of how we communicate that, both corporately to everybody involved in the school, but also how teachers also put that message across. Because again, the effects that it has here on young people and their rehabilitation, again, has been quite noticeable when they realize that, well, actually, because I may not get the exam results, or it may not be what I want, that is the end. For somebody to say, well, no, it's not, and give the examples of that, I think, again, and I think that may become a new normal as well, is that 16 and 18 thresholds will change. And certainly that's something I would certainly ask any educator to consider, to have those conversations to relieve that anxiety of young people. And that really moves nicely on to the idea of communication from the recovery curriculum. I've put there, don't rely on no news is good news, and that is one of my father's quotes, of what he used to say. And really, I think, certainly from what I've experienced, and certainly in mainstream, maybe I didn't communicate as much. I think that opportunity to get out the message to parents and to pupils is really important. And certainly we're beginning now, as we start our new term, we give daily updates to parents. And it's just on what's happening, just so that not just for the individual, but as a school. And that's really important. It's an opportunity to give positives of things that are going well, of those things that that pieces of information. And it really harks back again to your focus groups, that we've got parents who I regularly contact, and they're saying, we didn't know, and we can react to that, as well as staff as well. So I think that level of communication, whatever the method is certainly really important. And again, it's something that we incorporated here among staff as well. I simply was doing a morning Zoom call for 5 minutes with staff who were shielding, who were doing online learning. And again, it just allowed people to feel that they were informed, that they weren't worried. They did, as the recovery curriculum says, understand what was going to happen next. And also the young people. And it's very much here in the hospital that young people meet every morning, and they have that kind of communication update, and they can ask questions as well. Interesting again from the NHS that each young person here has what they call a care manager. And that is a person just oversees that young person's welfare and communication. And again, it's something very different to what I've experienced in mainstream education. So we may have a care manager, the person who is looking, maybe an art therapist. They may be a psychiatrist. They may be one of the house doctors, but they are a full range. And those people then are that point of contact. And I know, and we probably haven't got time to talk about tutoring, and I think tutoring is a huge aspect of education now we need to look at, and the quality of tutoring and how we train staff. But certainly the burden of just saying the tutor's the point of contact under COVID-19 may be challenging for the number of pupils that they would have. And certainly what we've seen here in the NHS is there is a wide range of communication from people in the office to people who are in the kitchen staff. They sometimes do that role. And if they feel confident, they're given that. And it just means that that parent can have that point of contact. And again, I would ask and maybe look at that situation. It certainly works here very much on a smaller scale, but I think it could upscale to not just burden one or two individuals with being the point of contact. If that can be spread, sending 5 or 6 emails per person or 10 certainly is different than a person having 30 or 40 to send. It's something, again, that's been very effective just to keep those elements of community, and it's meaning that people do not get overburdened and then not are able to make calls or emails, and that clearly then raises stress levels of particular parents. I've talked a little bit about tutoring, and I know that those conversations, and I can see that as I've tried in here in education, time is made every morning for young people to have those conversations, and sometimes very little is said. But the most important thing the staff understand and the children understand is that there may not be an answer at that particular point, and somebody may say, I will find it out for you. And it's really interesting coming here as a teacher. Sometimes you think you've got to have all the answers. And what's my experience of working in the NHS is sometimes you just have to pause and say, I can't do that now, but I will find it out for you. Certainly in my past education and what we're introducing here at the school here within the hospital is the idea that sometimes specialist PSHE teachers in these times of crisis do really work. And these people will feel confident. Certainly in the past, in my previous mainstream experience, working with PSA teachers who taught discrete PSE to every young person, certainly meant in those times of terrorist attacks, meant that those people felt confident to actually address young people and take their questions. And again, it may be something we're developing it here to give that opportunity to people who feel confident to do that, to actually communicate those kind of messages. Now, clearly, with the inability to have whole school assemblies, it makes it challenging, but certainly with modern technology, and I can see schools are getting that, maybe having one person delivering tutoring and the questions coming back and that person giving answers at a later date is certainly something very interesting. And it's certainly, I think initially, teachers who are tutors may be very, very concerned of how they go, and that guidance and that expertise, I think, is something that certainly I've found has worked very, very well as well. I was going to use the word kindness as just that little strap line at the end, and I thought it was something that was far more important. And certainly here, when you find young people and families at their lowest part of their life, for somebody to smile, clearly not a handshake, but give somebody an elbow, and I greet every student with an elbow, it's just something that breaks the ice. And just that nice comment that puts a smile on that young person's face is really part of a recovery process here. And certainly I think as we all go back into a COVID world for education, to think about what you say, the opportunity to say something nice, to smile at somebody, I think is really, really important. And here, often people have asked me, because this is a very, very different experience to what I've had prior to June, how do you cope? And it can be at times a real place of joy, because you can see that journey of recovery. And I would say that that's the opportunity I see with what happened. Children are resilient. I see children here who are at their lowest ebb. 3 months later, 3 weeks later, 6 months later, they are back. And I think that element of just being kind and saying something nice and smiling and greeting is something that should not be underestimated. The final two things are just looking ahead, and clearly these, with times at the moment with education, it's going to be, and again I would say the clinicians here, they're not looking at deadlines. They say we take things day by day, step by step. We do have a plan, and I think really that's a really interesting way to go forward. That time is the healer, and it's not a cliche. It really is quite something that is taken very seriously here. That the young person will develop and the school will develop particularly over time. Certainly, I think when bubbles can begin to mix, I was fortunate in mainstream education to be part of a project with mental health, a national project, which looked at training young people to then be peer support. We have lots of peer support for bullying, and we do it for school councils, but there's real opportunities, and it really worked. And what we see here is that we have a full range of young people from 11 all the way through to 18. But there really is a common bond. And that's been quite incredible to me. And in a way, it's not started by the staff. There's one individual who usually begins that. And that's being developed then through the occupational therapists here. And that person then really brings the people together. And I would say again, it's certainly something I think, and I know that not a lot of the national mental health and well-being charities are looking at this, at helping young people to support each other. Again, it's something I'm seeing here, that young people come together, and I can't give that recording, but I would love to record the leaving speeches that young people give to other people when people are about to be discharged. And just the warmth, and you can see that what they've done is, it's not been the adults that's assisted their recovery, it's each other. And again, that peer group support, I think, as bubbles begin to change and older students can mix with younger students, I think is something else. I'm very passionate about careers education, and I won't bore you with why, my own personal experiences, but again, I think plans for the future, because we are about to move into a very different world. A very different world of employment. And I think one of the ways that certainly I've worked in the past is beginning to look at guiding pupils at where opportunities are, where the skills are going to be needed. And I think there's a real thing for looking ahead towards career education as well. Thank you. Thank you, Olivia.
No problem. Thanks so much, Andrew. It's lovely to hear your transition from mainstream education to more of a specialist mental health, but I certainly think that the experiences you've had in your current role, we've got a question about that in just a second, can be reapplied back to mainstream as positive mental well-being and mental health and just general well-being of our pupils is becoming, well, and definitely rightly so, is a much more bigger focus for us moving in from September. And as you said, not forgetting that the mental health and well-being of teachers is the backbone of every school, making sure that your teachers are addressing their own anxieties and their own questions with those focus groups and with those support, the safety huddles will be I think, great for making sure that every school is a positive and welcoming environment to come back to, for everybody involved, in September. We've got a couple of minutes left for question and answers. So if anybody does have any questions, please pop them in the chat box in the Zoom call. We've had some already submitted ahead of time, which I just want to run through two really quickly, Andrew. The first is, we need to address the emotional and social needs of our children, absolutely, after what they've experienced during lockdown. But how do we also address that along with the academic gaps or the learning gaps that they're going to come to school with, having been out of education for quite a while?
I think it's the skill, just the regular skills of teaching. I think there cannot be panic, and people have got to understand that time, and I mentioned about just changing that mindset on time and how people perceive education. Certainly the model that we use, and we do have mixed classes, and we teach classes of 15 of young people all the way from 11 all the way through to 17. So you have to differentiate. But also it's just setting, and I think primary colleagues will find it maybe a little easy because they're used to that, of working at in different speeds and different areas. And certainly those secondary colleagues who are the practitioners, it is literally looking and being flexible on what particular topics young people are doing, looking at the consensus of what they need. We certainly here look, when we do some baseline assessment, and we look at initially maybe what the young people all do not know, and we go forward on that. So that kind of planning. Certainly the other thing I would say, is just, and it's mentioned in the report, the teacher has to stay calm and feel that they're in control. Yeah. And just not to panic. And that is in there. And that's it. It's just a case of, look, this is a journey. Yeah. And I think that's it. Clearly, as soon as I think certainly for those young people who study in examinations, when the rubric comes out of how that's going to be judged, it will allow schools to adapt. But at the moment, I think it'll be interesting how it'll be a different start of term within the classroom. But certainly I would say those areas of differentiation, of certainly allowing pupils, certainly for my personal practice teaching, it's helped no end here, because it has made me, in a way, become more of a pupil who's looking at certain groups and different lessons rather than one individual lesson plan.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And I think that what I've heard from other senior leaders as well is that there's no rush. We don't need to bring our children back and rush them back into getting them where they left off, because I think that's
but it's always nice to give, it's those short steps of being able to give positive reinforcement that things are going well, which I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. The other question we had, obviously, you've been placed at your current school via Zen Educate as an interim leader, and we, post teachers and teaching assistants into brand new schools every year. For some teachers, they'll already know their class and have pupils in mind about particular ones they might have concerns or worries about coming back to school. What advice would you give for teachers entering a new classroom or a new school for the first time where they've not met those children before, and what support would you give to them to allow them to go back in with a positive but calm approach to supporting their pupils?
I think really it's really interesting that most schools will have a transition probably next week, and I think to any new member of staff, if I address that first, for me it was clearly leaders and schools are going to be absolutely awash with things. I was able here to simply say, could somebody tell me where I can look at the background of young people, where I can find the past data, and that just allowed me to actually take individually to look at who the young people were, what their background, what was happening, so I could get an idea prior to. What was very positive is that, again, the leadership here, I was able to be linked with one particular person, and that person allowed me to just have the opportunity to ask questions, give me some idea where things stood, the processes, and that was invaluable. And I would say if there are leaders out there, if you can do that, and just taking that time will help that new member of staff. The other part of it really was the fact that Zen Educate were very, very good, and you found a lot of information out, and that was very, very helpful to me, both academic and a political stance as well of how things offer. But to anybody who's on a daily contract, sometimes you do need to put those extra few hours in on a daily basis. And I can't tell you, I stayed late here just to look and swat up, and the benefit was invaluable. And therefore, I would have to say that just maybe not getting out the door on your contracted hours will help you in those first few days.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a very good point. And I certainly think because we've got a wide variety of people on the call today, for teaching assistants who are going into a new one-to-one position, schedule time with the Senko, read the EHCP, read their targets, really understand where that child is going. And for teachers, speak to other members of staff within the school. They'll know those kids from if they've been in since reception, and then absolutely senior leaders to be open and honest. And I think
and that's what I'd completely say. I was very clear that this was very, very new to me, but it was interesting the ability that when people understand that conversation. But yeah,
fantastic.
being honest as well.
Yeah. We have had a question submitted, but for some reason, Zoom won't let me open the box. So could whoever's asked the question pop it in? Oh, we've got it. Okay. So we've got, in regards to building rapport and understanding trends in a pupil's behaviour, how do we, sorry, let me just read this again. We know we can't rush things with these people because they're going to be transitioning back into education, but how do we understand the point in time when they're not progressing as they should be now that they're back in school? Does that?
Yeah, it does. And
yeah.
To be honest, I'll answer it as a teacher, because I think leaders will go from this as their own, through their own way of how they want to use their stamp. As a teacher, it was very straightforward for me. I took on some very challenging young people, and it was a gradual approach, but it was being honest. I had the conversations on careers. I said, what did the young person want to do? And that's what I used as my driver. The first lesson I may have got 10 minutes work. The next meet I may have got 15. And it's about that. It's about that encouragement, and it's about being that structure. And that's what I said at the beginning about teachers being teachers, rather than every class being a conversation about COVID-19. That's where I think the infrastructure of a school, or a teacher being confident enough to say, actually, what we're going to do here is get back to some kind of normality. That's it. The actual then process. So what we would do here, what I would do as the leader here, if we think young people are not progressing, teachers will tell. We do that on a weekly basis. We give a period of time, usually between 10 days, and then we start to move. But we do challenge. Yeah. And again, it was an interest, and I'll finish this comment on this one. A young person who, again, is just about to be discharged. One comment he made was that he found he didn't like the fact that he was being treated differently. So when he was doing something wrong, the teacher wasn't punishing him. And that to him was not what he wanted. He just wanted to be seen as something absolutely regular. Yeah. So again, I know that a lot of schools, the whole idea of behaviour policies, but yes, there will need to be some flexibility, but it cannot be thrown out, because again, it goes back to that structure. And certainly I would say you would react in a way after 2 to 3 weeks, and it will be interesting. I'm an optimist, and I would think in 2 to 3 weeks, the resilience of young people will begin to develop, and there will be young people then who really do need support, but the critical mass will move on, and then we will get back to the point of having those honest conversations. Yeah. And in a way, that's what I think what young people want. They want to go back to normality. Back to their normality.
Exactly. And as we said earlier, that's what they've lost during the structure and the routine. They want that back. They're craving that back. And I think that some teachers may have a concern that over lockdown, young people have lost interest in learning. But actually, I think once that structure is back, their reignition of curiosity and desire for learning, a desire to learn more about different subject areas and take part in activities will bring them back to that normality. And you know, I don't necessarily foresee that we'll have much disengagement. I think it'll be a real relief actually for some children to come back to school.
As I said, I don't want to. I don't call myself. I've no crystal. All I'm giving is an experience of young people who are at the lowest ebb, and it's it's been fascinating to see how they move and how they've moved on. And yeah, and I hope that's some of the examples I've given may resonate with colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm conscious of time. I mean, if there are any other questions, you can absolutely email me directly. So my contact details are on the bottom of the screen here. So it's Olivia@ZenEducate. That's if you've got any questions for myself about special needs. If you want to get in touch with Andrew directly as well, just come through me. Or if you want to know more about ZenEducate as a company. Also, we're on social media, so please do, you know, we've got lots of blog posts about COVID-19 and about special needs and how we can support children in the transition back to school on our website. But otherwise, thank you so much for everybody taking the time to join, and thank you to Andrew to sharing his experiences of transitioning from mainstream to mental health and the learnings that you've had from there. And hopefully it's all been very helpful for you all, and that you can take things away to implement in classes from September next week. It's come around very quickly. So no, thank you to everybody. Fantastic. Right. The recording of this will be shared amongst everybody who signed up. So thank you. And if you've got any questions, please don't hesitate to contact me. Otherwise, I wish you all a very good rest of the day and hopefully a good start to the term from next week. So thank you. Bye.